Hello again, everybody. This is Liberty Man Van with you. Thanks for joining us for another show. In today's show, we're going to talk about some criticisms of capitalism. You'll see some clips of a Marxist professor being interviewed. He will offer several criticisms of capitalism, and then we'll offer a rebuttal. Away we go.
Every capitalist is always trying to either make more money or survive competitively by saving on his labor costs. One capitalist does it by substituting machines for working people, automating, getting a computer to do what he used to have 50 people do, etc., etc. Another capitalist does it by trying to get cheaper workers in place of more expensive ones, hiring women, if they're less expensive, to do the job that they used to pay men more for, hiring immigrants rather than native folks, moving to another part of the world where wages are much lower. We all know that. So capitalists are always trying to save on labor costs because they can make a better profit if they do that. But here comes the contradiction. If all capitalists are reducing the number of workers they pay or reducing the pay they give to their workers, what will result is that the working people have less and less money. And if they have less and less money, they can't buy what the capitalists are producing to sell. The capitalists, therefore, are destroying themselves, but they have no choice. They have to save on the labor outlay, and then that comes back and bites them in the rear end because there's no demand. If you've been so successful becoming rich as a capitalist, you've killed yourself.
The professor makes three basic claims here. The first is that if wages are cut, then workers will have less money to spend. That's true if we're talking about nominal wages, what they're actually paid. But you also have to consider the concept of real wages. And real wages take into account inflation. What if you're going through a period of time where prices are coming down? Then the same amount of money, or let's say prices are going down at 2% and your wages went down 1%. Well, your real buying power has actually increased because the price of goods have gone down more than your wages. So deflation in wages is not necessarily a bad thing. You have to look at the total environment. The second claim is that lower wages is going to create less demand for products. Why would wages go down? Could it be because the price of goods are going down as well? And if the price of goods are going down, you don't have to have as much money to buy the same amount of goods. So again, you have to look at the full context. Workers are not just workers, they're also consumers. His third claim is that if you have become rich as a capitalist, you have killed yourself. In the professor's eyes, the only way you can become rich as a capitalist is to decrease wages, I guess. I can think of other ways that could happen. What if you create maybe an iPhone and lots of people want to buy your iPhone? You create value for people and they want to buy your product. So no, his assertion again falls flat.
For example, when people couldn't buy in the 1970s, the capitalist system kept going anyway. How did it do that? How did it keep going when the people didn't have enough money from their wages to buy? The solution was credit. We loaded the world up. House credit, that's your mortgage. Car payment credit, nobody buys a car except by paying out. Credit cards, which didn't exist before the 1970s for anything but traveling businessmen, and only a small number of them. And then when that was not enough, we loaded up, for the first time in American history, an entire generation of students who can't get a degree without loading up with tens of thousands of dollars.
The attack here is on credit. Who decides whether to borrow money or not? People do. Would the professor outlaw credit? When people go, let's say, to the bank to borrow money to buy a new car, the rate of interest they're going to pay has a lot to do with their ability to repay the loan. People who are a good credit risk will get a lower interest rate than people who aren't. That's how free market works. Now, Some people are going to use credit responsibly and others will not. Should someone in Washington decide whether you get the loan or not? Or should the facts matter when you go to the banker and say, okay, I make this much a year and I've got these expenses? No, those are the types of details that should determine who gets the loan and what the interest rate should be. Now, he touches on another problem, which is the student debt crisis, student loan debt crisis. And that is a big problem today. But that problem was created by government intervention in the student loan market, so that it's not a free market anymore. So his attack on capitalism there is really an attack on government intervention.
The housing crisis, the crisis of overproduction, the fact that we have more houses than we do homeless people, but because you had this crisis of overproduction, too much of something was produced and people couldn't utilize it. I mean, talk about that concept and why this is an inescapable phenomenon under capitalism.
People could buy stuff even though their wages didn't pay for it by borrowing. And in 2008, the predictable happened. It turned out your fix only lasts for a while.
The professor here is referring to the housing bubble that burst in 2008, 2009. What caused the bubble? The Federal Reserve. Okay, the Federal Reserve System was created by government. They manipulate interest rates. They had driven interest rates way down so that mortgage rates were very low. That means people could go in and buy houses and have very low interest rates on their mortgage payments. So that incentivized a lot of people to go buy houses. That's part of what created the bubble. Okay, not the free market, but government intervention there. The second thing that caused it was the government pressured banks to lower their lending standards because the government wanted more people to be able to buy their own homes, and people in the past who maybe wouldn't have qualified for a loan got a loan because of this pressure applied by Washington. So the manipulation of interest rates by government, the lowering of lending standards pushed by government, that's what caused the bubble, not the free market.
They realized that in the West, North America, Western Europe, and Japan, 100 and 200 years of capitalism had built up impressive factories, offices, stores. But they were built up in the places where capitalism was born, Western Europe, North America, and Japan. That's where they had concentrated everything. And that's where they had drawn workers in off the countryside to become urban, industrialized working classes. And along the way, the workers, noticing how productive capitalism was since they did the work, demanded for themselves a rising standard of living. So roughly, from 1820 to 1970, particularly in the United States but elsewhere, wages rose. That's what, over that time, capitalists were doing so well they could raise the wages of their workers and still make out like bandits. So it was a system in which people began to get the idea capitalism works. It delivers the goods because it raises wages. You had to not look at what was happening to where most people in the world lived, Asia, Africa, Latin America, because for them the situation was horrible.
Wow, the professor here actually admits the great success of capitalism and how much wealth it's produced. And the effects went not just to the business owners, but to the workers as well, with rising wages. And how about all the goods it produced that people could now afford? Let's take one example, the automobile industry. When automobiles were first produced, they were a plaything of the rich. You had to be very wealthy to own an automobile. Then along came Henry Ford in the Model T, the production line, the division of labor, and he was able to bring the price of cars down to a point where ordinary people could actually afford them. This happened not just in the auto industry, but in textiles, clothes, food. So people were able to actually purchase things that in the past only kings could afford. You know, an extra coat, an extra pair of pants, little things that we take for granted now. As a matter of fact, capitalism has become so enormously successful that we can even afford to pay Marxist professors to do nothing of value. What I want to show you next to illustrate the point I just made is a graph. And what you're going to see on this graph is the per capita income. That means per person income in the world. And you're going to see going back all the way into even the time of Christ, okay? Back at the beginning of AD. You're going to see there's kind of a flat line for per capita wealth. It's flatline, it gradually starts to go up, and then about the time of the Industrial Revolution and capitalism, you're going to see that line just explode to the upside. That means an explosion of wealth, not just for entrepreneurs, not just for business owners, but for ordinary people like us.
But if you concentrated on where capitalism was born, you could fool yourself into thinking, wow, this is a system that works. And the capitalists, of course, and the people who liked it celebrated all of that. Then in the 1970s, capitalists had this eureka moment. They said to themselves, wait a minute, we're in North America, Western Europe, and Japan, where the wages are now very high. Workers are very happy. But why are we here? In the rest of the world, which has been savaged by the growth of capitalism in those privileged areas, wages are very low. So in this eureka moment, capitalists said, what are we doing here in Western Europe, North America, and Japan? It's much more profitable if we produce in China, in India, in Brazil, anywhere else. And there begins what we're still in the middle of, the exodus. The abandonment of the places of origin of capitalism by the capitalists. So there's a massive move to China, India, Brazil, and all those places, producing what? Well, what every capitalist wants, which is to make a bundle. So they build big factories, imagining that they can sell all of this stuff like they used to. But they forgot something. If you go from high wages in the United States to low wages in China, the bottom line is that the people earning wages are earning a lot less than they used to. It's not just that they're not Americans, they're Chinese, but they can't buy back what you're building. They can't manage to consume what you have the capacity to produce.
The professor here is discussing what is a concern for American workers, and that's the offshoring of jobs. A lot of jobs have moved overseas. Let's say in the sock industry, for example. I grew up in an area where the sock industry was big, and a lot of those jobs have gone to China now, or they've gone to Indonesia, and that is bad for the area. But let's say you have 10,000 workers in the garment industry who lose their jobs. We would all agree that's bad for those workers. But you also have to consider not just the 10,000 workers in that industry, but the 300 million consumers in the United States, and those 300 million paying less for jobs, paying less for goods, far outweighs the loss of jobs. So again, you have to look at not just workers, but consumers. We're all not only workers, we're also consumers.
They came up with the following idea, that the problem of capitalism is two fundamental things. One, that private individuals own the means of production. They own the land, they own the factories, they own the stores, the machinery, And that the people, the owners, are really a very small part of the population. 1%, 2%, 5%, maybe even 10%, although rarely did it get that high. But that means the vast majority of people are never part of the owners.
Here he makes two claims. The first is that the private ownership of the means of production is bad. What's the alternative? Well, in his world, it would be public ownership. This idea that, yeah, we're just all going to decide how to run everything together because that's what socialism is. Folks, that's not the way it plays out. Somebody has to make those decisions, and you know who that somebody is going to be. It's somebody in the central government, okay? In the Soviet Union, it was someone in the Politburo making those decisions and handing them down to everybody else. It's not going to be everybody making these decisions. It's going to be a few people making these decisions, and these decisions are going to be carried out through force if need be. That's the way it actually plays out. His next criticism is that business owners are a small part of the population. Why might that be? Could it be because, let's see, if I go borrow some money and start a business and I produce some product and nobody wants to buy my product, the bank's still going to want me to repay that money I borrowed from them, and I could lose my business and my entire investment, and gosh, I don't want to take on that much risk. Could maybe that be part of the reason not everybody's a business owner? You see, he just wants to take the risk part out of the equation. You can't take the risk part out of the equation. And besides, people can invest in a business. They don't have to go out and start their own business. If they want to take a little bit of risk, they can buy stocks. Is that so bad?
And the basic socialist idea was, if you allow a small number of people to control the means of producing all the goods and services we all need to survive, they're going to use that control to make the system work for them. And they're not going to worry about the rest of us. In other words, it's a recipe for a society that produces wealth for the top 5 to 10%, but not for everybody else. That gives power, political and other power, to those at the top and not to everybody else. So the socialist idea was, this is fundamentally unjust, fundamentally undemocratic. This is what's wrong with capitalism, and how do you solve it? You make collective ownership, not private. The society as a whole should own the means of production, the factories, the offices, the stores, so that they are good for everybody, so that what they produce is distributed roughly equally, so that the influence and the decisions are made. So social, that's why it's called socialism. It's the society that should own. It focuses on the workplace. Its idea is the way you make sure that the government never again becomes an institution over the people, but rather simply an instrument of the people, is by making sure that at the base of society, where people live and work, the wealth, the productive capability is in their hands. If you want the slogan of 21st century socialism, it's this: democratize the enterprise.
Democratize the enterprise? Gee, don't we already have that? Has the professor heard of stocks? Yes. As I just stated a minute ago, you can own part of a company by buying stocks, or you can choose not to. The choice is yours.
End this process where there's a handful of people who make the decision. In most American corporations, and corporations do the bulk of the business in modern capitalism, a tiny group of what are called major shareholders, the people who have big blocks of shares, they select who the board of directors. 1% of Americans own 3/4 of the shares. It's highly concentrated. A tiny number of people, the 1%, own the bulk of the shares. How do you run a corporation? At the top is something called a board of directors, usually 15 to 20 people. How do you get on the board of directors? There's an election every year to get on that board. And the way the election worked is, if you own a share of stock in the company, you get 1 vote. If you have 10 shares, you get 10 votes. If you own 1 million shares, you get 1 million votes. If you have no shares, that's how many votes you get. So there's no pretense of democracy. So if a handful of people own the bulk of the shares, they control everything. They select the 15 or 20 people on the board of directors. The board of directors decides what the company produces, how the company does it, where the company is located, and what's done with the
He complains here that people who own more shares of a stock get more of the decision-making opportunity. Again, he leaves out the risk part of the equation. If you own 3/4 of the shares in a stock and the stock price goes zzz, you're going to lose a lot more money than somebody that owns 1 share of the stock. So no, it's not unfair that that person should get to share more of the decision-making process with the company. He has more skin in the game. It just makes sense.
If workers took over a factory that had a worker co-op instead of a top-down, and the workers together decided what to do with the profits, you think they'd give a few executives $25 million so they have more money than they know what to do with, while everybody else has to borrow money to send their kids to college? It'll never happen. You think a collection of workers, say 400 in a factory, considering that you could make more money if you moved the production to China, are they going to vote to get rid of their own jobs? It's not going to happen. They're not going to destroy their community by having an empty factory. They're not going to deprive their local government of the tax revenues to run the schools and the hospitals. And they're not going to deprive themselves of jobs. So what we've had in the last 40 years, all those jobs leaving, would never have left if it was the collective decision of the workers where this production is going to take place.
There's a problem with the professor's rosy co-op factory scenario. The problem is whatever product they produce has got to compete in the marketplace. And let's say we go in and we're going to share and share alike, and we decide we're going to give everybody a big raise. But the big raise causes the price of our product to go up higher than other competitors in the same field. So our widget costs more than other widgets on the market. We've given ourselves a big raise. The price of our product has gone up. Now it's not competitive on the market anymore. We can't sell the widgets anymore. The revenues go to zero. The profits go to zero. And yes, that's fair. We'll all get paid the same. Zilch.
And I wanted you to also just counter another argument that I hear constantly. I earned it. You know, we earned this money.
The best way to describe this is to go back to Karl Marx and his analysis of capitalism so that we all understand what earning is about. Let's imagine you are a person looking for a job, and I'm the employer that you're looking to get hired by. So you come in and you sit down, you fill out your application form, and I look at you, and I describe to you the kind of work we'd like to have you do. You'll come 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, and you'll sit over there, and you'll do this kind of work, etc., etc. And we get through all that, and you're okay with that. And then we get to that big question, how much are you going to get paid? And let's say we dicker back and forth, and we agree on $20 an hour. So I'm going to pay you $20 an hour. At this point, Marx enters with a smile on his face and says, I'm now going to show you, the reader of his books, that when that deal is done, the $20 an hour, something is going on that you actually know, but you don't want to face, but I'm going to show it to you. When I hire you for $20 an hour, I know that for every hour that you give me your work, your brains, your muscles to work, I'm going to have more stuff to sell at the end of the day because you're added to my workforce. You're going to help me produce more goods or more services or better quality goods and services than I would have if I didn't employ you. So I'm going to say to myself, it costs me to get Abby $20 an hour. What do I get out of it? I'm going to have the output that Abby adds by her labor. Now that has got to be more than $20. So the only way I'm going to hire you for $20 an hour is if you produce more in the hour than I give you.
Wow. Sounds like these folks just made a deal with the devil. Hit it, Charlie! Again, the professor only wants to look at the reward side of the equation. He ignores the risk. What if this business owner saved his own money for a good period of time, then borrowed some more money, put that pool together to open this business? No one in their right mind is going to take on that kind of risk without the possibility of reward. I guess in the socialist mind, his reward should come in heaven for being quote-unquote fair.
He just ripped people off. The way most corporations work is 4 times a year, they take the profits they've made in the preceding 3 months, and they distribute a portion of them to their shareholders. These distributions are called dividends. So if you own a lot of shares, say because you inherited them from your grandma, or you stole money and bought them on the stock market, there are lots of ways of getting them. But if you have them, 4 times a year, you go to your mailbox in the morning and you get an envelope and you tear it open, and inside is a check for your share of the profits that have been distributed to shareholders. For rich people, this is millions of dollars. They have all that money. What did they do exactly to earn that money? Nothing. Those people are going to tell me they earned what? Did they ever set foot in the factory? No. Do they have any idea what this company does? No. They don't care.
Apparently, in his mind, only undeserving, indolent people can own shares. But what if you're a school teacher and you put a little money away in every paycheck and you buy some shares of stock that pay a good dividend, say Exxon Corporation? You're buying a little bit of shares every time you get a chance your whole life. Now you get into retirement and you're starting to get you're living off the dividends. Now, when you die, you pass those shares along to your only son. As it turns out, the only son is doing pretty well with his job. He doesn't need the extra income, so he decides to give that money to charity. In the professor's mind, these types of people apparently don't exist.
Well, let's now do a little logic. If there are people like shareholders who get a lot of goods and services they didn't help produce, then there must be elsewhere in that system people who produce what they do not get. So that means if we allow that we are saying some people, your job is to produce a lot more than you get so that these people can get a lot more than they produce. For Marx, he stands up and says, I rest my case. This system sucks.
The last time I checked, workers who produce do get something. It's called a paycheck. But in his socialist system, he'd have to share that paycheck with his fellow workers for the common good.
Famous socialist Rosa Luxemburg once said that it's either socialism or barbarism. Here we are 100 years later. In what ways have you seen that play out today?
The 62 richest people in the world, most of whom are Americans, not all American, but most of whom are U.S. citizens. The 62 richest people together have more wealth than the bottom half of the population of this planet, roughly 3.5 billion people. That's beyond obscene. I don't know what, I don't have an adjective that captures this, but I can describe what it means. If you look at all the statistics of the World Health Organizations, the bottom half of our population are people who die way earlier than they need to. Why? Because their diets are no good, or they don't have enough food in the first place, or they can't get to a clinic to have little problems that are easily solved by modern medical methods taken care of.
Barbarism? Really? You want to talk about barbarism? Has he heard of the Soviet Union? Is he aware that in the Soviet Union people didn't have basic good? I mean, soap was a luxury. There were workers in coal mines who didn't have soap. People would wait in line for hours to get a loaf of bread. People starved to death. They didn't produce enough food on the collective farms to feed people. They had to import wheat from the United States. That's what collectivism gives you. Who was doing well in this setup, though? Well, it was people who worked in the government. Yeah, people in the Politburo, they were living high on the hog while everybody else was almost starving. That's what socialism gives you. And make no mistake, communists are just socialists with the courage of their convictions, because what communism does, socialism does, is it concentrates power in the hands of a few. Folks, you're not going to be making these decisions. No, it's going to be somebody in the central authority that's going to be making the decisions, and everybody else is going to be suffering. Oh, and did I mention the slaughtering of tens of millions of political opponents in the Soviet Union? Yes, tens of millions. You want to talk about barbarism? Is he kidding? I'll keep my capitalism. How about you? Well, that's the show for today. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed us tearing down this Marxist professor's critiques of capitalism, the system that's brought the most wealth to the most people of any other in human history. And I hope you had a good time. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, tell a friend. And we'll see you next time. It's Liberty Man Van signing off.